Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Election outcomes, pre-K funding, and much more tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by a roundtable of journalists, starting with Karanja Janaku, executive editor, associate publisher with the Tri-State Defender. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
Brian Poe is a reporter with the Commercial Appeal. Thank you for being here again.
Thank you.
Toby Sells is news editor with the Memphis Flyer. Thanks for being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Along with Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. We'll start with kind of next steps in the elections, I think, in mostly the county races, but then there's been a number of developments, outcomes, ramifications at the city council. But let's start with probably the premier race, which will be county mayor. Lee Harris, current state senator, Democrat, running against the current trustee, David Lenore, Republican. I'll start with you, Bill. Where do we see this going? And when? This is a silly but necessary question. I've had a lot of people ask me, when is election day for the county mayor's race? Because it's not November, right?
No,
okay.
It is not. The folks who won the primaries this month, they advanced to the August 2nd ballot. That's when you have several tiers of races. You have the county general election, and then you have the primaries on the same ballot for state and federal offices. So the August ballot will feature, for example, the primaries for governor, which is a statewide race, and the other statewide race for the United States Senate. So at the top of the ballot for the county races in the general election, David Lenore and Lee Harris. I think this is going to be a really good race. I think it's going to be a really good discussion between two politicians who have some different views on how the county advances, but who both agree that the county cannot stand still.
Karanja, I'll turn to you. I mean, thoughts on the race as we go into it?
Well, I think Bill touched that it's going to be a good race. You know, the turnout was interesting because I think Lenore got like 18,000 votes, and Harris had like 34,000. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be interesting to see how the turnout goes. But I think that I love the idea that we have two very experienced, well-versed candidates that you can toss an issue out and you can expect something thoughtful as opposed to sort of the canned answers that we often get when we're dealing with candidates.
Yeah, Ryan, your thoughts on it? I mean, you've covered them both, and it is interesting, yes. They both have track records. I mean, they both have voting records, they both have policies they've pursued and not pursued in their various official offices.
Yeah, they're both well-known candidates who have well-stated policy positions. I think the key to winning this race for both of them is going to be who can hold on to their base while going to the middle. As it is always in Shelby County. Like Karanja mentioned, Lee Harris had more votes in the primary. So it's up to Lenore to try to siphon away those votes. In Shelby County, it's a blue county, so any Republican to win is going to have to appeal to the Democrats. And I'm not sure Lenore, whether he'll do that or not.
Yeah, and Toby, I mean, there's two interesting things. One is in the outcome in the primary, the more ideological, more the Terry Rowland on the Republicans, Chisholm for the Democrats, they lost and they lost handily. Right. So the more mainstream, I'm trying not to be pejorative words,
Certainly.
But a little bit more moderate, a little bit more mainstream, a little bit more. I don't know. Those candidates won versus the ideologues.
Yeah, voters seem to go to the middle, and that's an interesting thing. We were talking about before the show, was there a blue wave in Shelby County? And I say all the time that I don't know anything, but everything I know is from Jackson Baker, our political dean over there at the Memphis Flyer, and he says, indeed, there is a blue wave happening in Shelby County. If you take Sidney Chisholm's votes and Lee Harris's votes, put them together, they won 13,000 more votes than all three of the Republican county mayor candidates got all together. So, and he's also looking down at some of the state Senate races and the House races, and there are Democrats running for every single one of those seats where Republicans are kind of cherry picking their way through there. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
And we'll have, Bill, we will have primaries. That means we'll have Bredesen versus Marsha Blackburn, presumably, right?
Well,
or no, we'll have, what will we have on the federal? Because it's a big deal this year. I mean,
yeah.
The Senate race, this is the Senate race, the U.S. Senate, and then the governor's race. Those primaries will be happening right now.
You will have the primaries for those seats, which means that Blackburn and Bredesen won't be head-to-head on that ballot. They won't be head-to-head until November, but the Senate race has really already moved to the general election campaign. The statewide race that people will be watching the closest on the August ballot is the four-way primary for Tennessee governor on the Republican side, with Carl Dean, the nominee apparent. On the Democratic side, no slight at Craig Fitzhugh, but the balance between the two in terms of fundraising and operation is pretty formidable for Craig Fitzhugh in that race.
And going back to something Ryan said in getting the base out, so you would assume, I'm a terrible political prognosticator, but I'll go ahead and go there. You would assume that a whole lot of Republicans are going to turn out to vote in that four-way race for the Republican primary, the governor, because you've got Diane Black, you've got Bill Lee, you've got Randy Boyd, you've got a lot of money and a lot of support behind them. They're also going to pull for county mayor when they're in the booth.
And that's why Democrats who have put the party back together, have reformed the party in the last year, are really hesitant about all of this blue wave talk, and also because they don't want their base to get complacent. Here's how the numbers break down. The Democratic turnout in these county primaries, which go back to 1994, has always been greater than the Republican turnout. It's been greater because the Republicans concede there are more Democrats in Shelby County, people who identify as Democrats in Shelby County. For all of the talk about the turnout and the numbers in what we saw in the May elections this year, you have to remember that Democratic turnout was high in 2010 and 2014 in these primaries. And in 2010, the Republicans took every single countywide office on the ballot. In 2014, they took every countywide office on the ballot in the general except for one. And the reason why is because Republicans have had great success with candidates who are able to get crossover votes from people who identify as Democrats. That's the key to their success.
And we'll kind of segue into some of the county-wide races, and the people who won will have an impact on council. But we'll start maybe with you, Toby. We talked before the show. Philip Spinoza, city councilman, is leaving, has resigned his seat to go run the Chairman Circle, which is a group within the chamber. I should say the Memphis Daily News is a member of the Chairman Circle. But your thoughts on Spinoza leaving, and now the city council has to vote on a replacement.
That's right, and those mechanisms they're already in place, and they'll start picking somebody in the coming weeks. But Spinoza's exit was abrupt, and there wasn't a news release from him, or a tweet, or a Facebook status, or Instagram post. It was a press release from the chamber that said you kind of had to read the tea leaves at the bottom that said he once served on the council, and I called him back and said, "Is this right? Is this correct? Is he still there? Is this a typo?" And he said, "No. Our policy is if you work for the chamber, you have to give up public office." And that's really all we've heard from Spinoza, other than a kind of a short news release that went out from the city council early last week, or this week rather, that just said, yes, indeed, he's gone, and here's the mechanism to replace him.
And Karanja, thoughts on who's going to replace Philip Spinoza? I mean, what are you hearing, or what would you like to see done?
I have no idea. I mean,
I appreciate the honesty.
I really don't. I think I'm just more interested in making sure that our readers know that the vacancy has come up, because we did find out on sort of a short and abrupt notice, as you did. And I'm hoping that just overall that there is not so much a blue or red wave as it's just a civic wave of engagement, so that you'd be prepared to handle a vacancy here or any of the other possible vacancies that Bill was talking about earlier as a result of some of the council people being in other elections.
Yeah, Ryan, your thoughts on this and some of the other openings that the council has now, because they would be filling positions really just through the fall, is that right?
Well, yeah, depending on if candidates win their elections this fall. So, but on Philip Spinoza's seat, actually, I think the key question now is who's going to fill the seat. Heidi Schaefer has told me she's interested, who is the chairwoman of the Shelby County Commission.
I've heard termed out, is that correct?
She is at the end of her term this year. Also, Nick Vergas is another one I know has council support, who is one of the owners of the Rendezvous restaurant. And there are others too, but that's going to be the what people are watching coming up.
Last thoughts on these kind of shuffling of seats and so on.
This could be the first of 4 vacancies on the council, and the people who are appointed to Spinoza's vacancy and the others, if they happen, will serve through the end of 2019. So they could be there for a while. You have 3 other council members: Janice Fullilove, Bill Morrison, and who is the third?
Edmund Ford.
Edmund Ford.
Yes, Edmund Ford Jr., who won their primaries in May and who are in the county general election. And if they win, then you'll have a turnover of 4 seats on the council. And the council members who are going to make the appointment in this case have a decision before who, and the decision is, does the council want to appoint someone who's going to run in 2019 in effect for re-election, or do they want to appoint someone who is specifically not going to run and will serve only on an interim basis?
Let's stay with council right now. They've got a lot going on. I mean, they've got budget season coming up. They've also got, we'll talk about the historic overlays, I mean, which matters a lot to certain neighborhoods and defines a lot. I'll turn to you. There are 2 historic districts that have been before the council that have sort of a tentative approval. Cooper Young has been fighting for one for quite some time, which I know you all covered, and now Speedway Terrace, which is kind of north of Crosstown, a historic neighborhood up there, has gotten tentative approval. Your thoughts on that process, because there's some changes to the historic district overlay that's going on as part of this.
Right, and I'd say Cooper Young and Speedway Terrace, they want the same thing. They're seeing a really hot Memphis real estate market right now, where folks are coming in from out of town. And a lot of times they'll just demolish an old home and then they'll put up these brand new homes that don't look like the rest of the neighborhood. The neighbors say that's bad for the neighborhood, doesn't look like us. These guys are trying to make a buck. So we want to kind of put the brakes on some of that, put in some extra regulations there to make sure that these things don't come in and ruin the character of the neighborhood. Cooper Young, as you said, they've been working on theirs for months and months, maybe even more than a year. They went through the approval process. Council had a lot to say about it. And they approved it tentatively, but they said we're going to hold the minutes on it until we kind of fine-tune some of the last things in there. When can you demolish a home? What should they look like? All those kind of things. And then right on the heels of Cooper Young came the Speedway Terrace neighborhood saying the same thing. They're saying, we're seeing these kind of hungry developers coming in, and we're afraid that, they may come in here with some products that just don't look like us, and we want to do something. The council similarly said, okay, we're going to kind of give tacit approval here, and then kind of hold it and make some fine tunes there at the very end and make sure that it kind of works for everybody. So far, the people I've talked to in the neighborhoods, they are hopeful that this is going to kind of help put the brakes on some of these larger developments. But they're also worried of what the council might finally do, and they might do it in a hurry, and they might not have any say-so or any input into the thing and come up with something that really nobody wants.
Yeah, and I remember when Crosstown was being developed, and we had Scott Morris on from Church Health Center, now I think it's just Church Health, and they moving into Crosstown, one of the big tenants there, and he expressed real concern that he didn't want, he was happy about Crosstown being redevelopment and the blighted building being fixed, but didn't want gentrification to happen, didn't want that somehow, particularly in Speedway Terrace, and I'm paraphrasing what Dr. Morris said, was worried about that. Do you think, Cronje, do you think that's part of this historic overlay, is a concern about gentrification, a concern about, again, this kind of return? You can feel it, the numbers prove it out to some extent, this kind of renewed interest in Midtown and downtown, and what does that mean to all people who live in Midtown and downtown, not just some people?
Sure, I'd like to think that there's concern about gentrification. I'm very sensitive to the sentiment of the people from the neighborhood standpoint about what happens to the neighborhood. I used to live in Cooper Young. Okay. My house was demolished, okay? And where my house was like a 1912 bungalow. Now there's a structure there that I need a helicopter to get into, and so I know a lot of the people are very sensitive to the idea that, hey, this just doesn't fit in. And so what I am encouraged about is just the way that they've sort of rallied together, although Cooper Young is always pretty much tightly knit, to be able to lobby their council people and to make sure that to the degree that they can affect the outcome that they are.
Yeah. Ryan, other thoughts on council's actions right now? Maybe budget season, you know, we're again, we're talking about this good real estate economy. Real estate taxes pay for much of the operating and capital budget for the city. Jim Strickland was on the show last week talking about he's proposing a tax cut of some sort. It gets into the reassessment and reappraisal stuff. Yeah. What's the sentiment on council right now about budget season?
Well, I think the big thing that they're focusing on right now is wages for employees. Edmund Ford especially has been pushing hard for this kind of a minimum wage, kind of a minimum base wage for current city employees. So that's going to be a big thing coming up. The mayor's, you know, I think everyone is probably on board with keeping the tax rate where the mayor wants to put it, which is lower than last year, but equal.
And what is it again? I can't remember what
the exact tax rate. Bill, you might know that.
It's down to 315, 320,
319. Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. Give or take. You know, accuracy, it's overrated. But the sentiment seems to be to move forward. They've had very calm budget seasons, you know, the last couple of years. They haven't had a lot of ruckus. They seem to have done the subcommittee and committee work, and they come to the end. And I remember the first, you know, budget that Strickland did. Everyone kind of said, "Oh, wow, that was quick." You know?
And it looks like it's headed in that direction.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, budget surpluses kind of create that kind of sentiment. We want to go. We talked with the mayor last week, Bill, about the feud and you know, some of the disagreement between the city, Elvis Presley Enterprises, and the arena they want to put up, and the Grizzlies and the non-compete. Any progress? I mean, those are some big players, big money, big interests. Any update on that?
Well, Graceland was at the county commission for committees sessions this past week, and then the day before that, Graceland was at the city council. Neither body is in any way at this point ready to vote on the resolution that Graceland wants, saying, yeah, we back your increase in your draw on the TIF, the Tax Increment Finance District. What Graceland has is a lot of questions from council members and commissioners about issues like, well, what about the non-compete? What if the Grizzlies seek to enforce that at a time when you have sports franchises in other sports and in basketball who are looking at moving to other markets? Are we at risk on that? Why should these bodies act when we're waiting on a court ruling anyway on whether the non-compete says what everybody thinks it says, or what some people think it says, and what some people think it does not say? And the council wanted to know, and the commission wanted to know, and this goes to Ryan's point, what are you going to pay people who work for your company? And when you say a living wage, that really doesn't cut it. You're going to get, if anything, even more questions when you use that statement, because the immediate question is going to be, what does a living wage mean to you? Tell me specifically what that wage is an hour.
Yeah, you're nodding.
It's just, I think, you know, Mayor Strickland kind of drew a line in the sand that I thought was necessary. You know, you had the general manager of Elvis Presley Enterprises going straight to the people of Whitehaven saying, hey, you need to lobby your folks up there. We need some extra money. You know, we need that increase in our TIF to make this project happen. So go lobby your people and tell them to bring this project down here. And Strickland, this was what, last week, 2 weeks ago, said no. You know, what he's saying is wrong. You know, I have been meeting with him. My team has been meeting with him to try to get this thing happening. But he basically wants $3 million of tax money. It seemed like up front. You know, he said, no, we need that money for police and fire and our budget. And that was kind of the first time that I'd ever really seen a public figure like that kind of draw a line in the economic development sand and say, no, hold up. You know, if you want a pilot, if you want something else, we're willing to do that. But just to front you the money and then to have the people of Whitehaven to try to rally behind this, we're going to stop it right there.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, Ryan.
Well, I was just going to point out, even though Mayor Strickland did say that, you know, they didn't want to take money from police and fire, Chief Operations Officer Doug McGowan told council that they are actually open to considering a TIF, which would, it doesn't really take money from the city, but it means less money will go to the city. They're open to that discussion. They just want to know what exactly Graceland is going to do with that money. And that's kind of where council are too. And Graceland's, Elvis Presley Enterprises key point, at this point, it doesn't really matter so much. I mean, they would like for council to approve and commission to approve this, but it doesn't really matter so much what they do. They just need to exhaust all their legal remedies at this point in order to get a court ruling on whether the FedEx Forum non-compete will apply to their project. Once they have that, then they can go back to council and commission and reconsider. But
right.
And they're saying that could take months and months and months before we finally get a Chancery Court ruling on this thing. We want to act now and go ahead and get this thing built. So that's their argument against that, just saying let's go ahead and do this thing and not wait for the ruling.
And no one expects that a Chancery Court ruling would be the end of it. Whoever loses in that ruling is going to appeal.
Right.
Well, is Graceland saying there's a clock ticking, and if something doesn't happen by X, we need to look at other options, Nashville, things of that sort?
Yeah, well, nobody has said Nashville specifically, but Nashville is a presence that is there because there were folks in Nashville who wanted the guest house at Graceland to be located there, just as there were folks within the city who thought that the best place to locate that hotel was downtown. So
it's a long shuttle ride from the guest house at Graceland to Graceland. That's a 3-hour shuttle to get
Elvis Presley would be turning over in his attic.
Absolutely.
But yeah, there is some urgency always with developers on any project. I think we've all seen that, and developers will tell you part of their credo is time is not my friend on a project. But that's a question that council members and commissioners are asking. What is the hurry? If this thing is hung up in court and you don't even have a hearing date yet to kind of start down the road of getting a court to resolve it, then why are you here asking for a resolution at this point?
We only have about 6 minutes left. I want to get some MLGW stuff, but at TVA stuff. But we were talking a little bit about the incentives, TIF incentives, maybe pilot. We talked with the mayor about this last week, which I keep referencing. It is online. You can go to that interview. It also comes against the backdrop of a lot of conversation about how best, or if at all, to have minority and women-owned business incentives built into the pilots. And there's kind of a bit of a feud between FedEx division president Richard Smith, who's now chair of the chamber, and some other folks, where he wanted to move to what he called more of a carrot approach, and feels like they have a very now it's a punitive approach that runs off relocating businesses. All this comes, and we talk about living wage. I mean, it is an interesting thing when there's just an increasing amount of development. I mean, billions of dollars at this point, and yet still statistically, by the last numbers, a tiny percentage of business receipts in the county area go to minority and women-owned businesses. And so it's a real struggle. I think most people want all this development, but how do you engineer it, or can you engineer it to the benefit of all?
Yeah, I think for a number of the people that I talk to, it's really a non-starter to go to a situation where there's not going to be some type of basic requirement for new businesses relative to spend. I mean, I find people who are somewhat on different tracks, somewhat united against the idea of pulling that out altogether. But I am intrigued by Mr. Smith's idea of having an economic revolution. Okay, it seems to me that we do need one. But if I had a chance to talk with him, and I've been trying, is that when you have a revolution from the top down, you got a real problem, And so, when it seems like we're talking more about some type of reformation, a real economic revolution in this town would involve some way for the largest segment of the community to be more involved in the discussion on the front end. When I look back at the jobs conference and those kinds of things that have happened here, the African American community, elected officials notwithstanding, basically are on the outside looking in, and maybe not even looking in, looking the other way as the meeting's going on, And so there's just a lot of concern about the development of the Smith proposal itself in terms of how it even came about. And we'll see whether they'll be able to, there's some talk that it's been taken off the table or is never on the table, and I'm not really sure what they're about.
Yeah, you want to clarify, and then we'll go to Toby here, what Jim Strickland said, Mayor Strickland said on the show last week was that Richard Smith has pulled that proposal off the table and things will just continue.
He said it several times. Yeah. We've heard in the last week from other folks who are involved in other parts of the discussion that it's not necessarily off of the table, that it's more tentative than that, and that the discussions are still ongoing, and also some clarification that Smith's proposal didn't apply to all pilots in the kind of tentative form that it was in.
Okay, and we've reached out to Richard Smith, and we're hoping to get him on the show sometime in the next month, and other people involved in this whole thing, because it is, as you said, there's so many parts to this, and so many promises made, and so many, it's incredibly complicated. As we record this Thursday morning, TVA is voting. Talk about how the potential impact, we have to do this in a bit of a time warp because we don't know how the vote will go, right. But the potential impact that people should watch for on this TVA vote that's going on.
It is expected that TVA is going to approve a change in their rate structure. They're really careful to say it's not a rate increase. It's a change in the way that they charge people, and they liken it kind of to your cell phone. They say, okay, you get a bill. Part of that bill is just to access our network. All the satellites and everything. So we're going to put a new 12% grid access fee on your utilities for electricity. Just to access our grid. They say they need to do that because electricity rates and revenues for them have been sliding, as they have for MLG&W, because our technology is getting more energy efficient. Think LED light bulbs, that kind of thing. So we're starting to see the demand for electricity wane. At the same time, our huge, massive grid is still the same. We have to charge the upkeep on that. Opponents say that it's going to be bad for lower income folks. Here's this mandatory fee that everybody has to pay, and you can't squeeze out savings by turning the lights off or doing some of those other things. And they say it's going to be bad for small businesses because TVA is kind of allowing for some incentives for larger industrial users and things. So there's a lot of conversation about what's going on. But if I was a betting man, I'd say that the access fee would get charged, and we'll see it soon.
All right, more to come on that. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.